So along the lines of some of the things we talked about, I'm going to hit you up with 3 stats here. And I'm not like a huge, big advanced metrics guy, like I'm studying them, but when I run across them, I think that they're typically valid. So, for example, for those of you who are into stats, you know that the passer rating, for example, is a stat that's been around for decades. And is it meaningful? Yes. Has it been improved? Yes. The QBR is an improvement because it basically takes context into the statistics, and it takes game situation and scenarios into play. If you throw a completion for 2 yards on 3rd and 1, that's more successful than completing a 15-yard play on 3rd and 22. So basically, that it would be rated in such a way that if you threw a 2-yard completion, you wouldn't be given much credit for that in a passer rating. But you did what you needed to do to get the job done. So anyway, it even goes beyond that. So I'm going to start out with the one defensive stat I've got here that really speaks to what we're talking about in terms of the improvement. The improvement is unquestioned. Even when Oklahoma was dominating the Big 12 a few years ago, they were still giving up scads of points and yardage against just about everybody in the Big 12. Now they've gotten to a point where they're pretty much clamping down everybody in the Big 12. We'll see what happens on the next level with some of the national powers. But so Oklahoma last season on defense limited opponents to 30 touchdown drives and 10 field goals in 149 opponent possessions. So they had a stop rate of 73+%. It was the best in the Big 12. It was number 14 in the nation.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of incredible to think about, understanding certainly where Oklahoma has come from. I mean, I think where Oklahoma struggled a little bit last year defensively is really kind of giving up the big play. They gave up a lot of big plays to Kansas State, gave up quite a few big plays to Iowa State as well. It's not at all, completely surprising to see that stat. But to your point, Mark, seeing this over the last year, understanding what that improvement has looked like, and really just getting off the field is such a big component to the defense. It's been kind of a bend but don't break defense from Grinch, but they've been excellent on 3rd down. They've been excellent on being able to get off the field. So that's a trend that you would hope that would continue and expect to continue. And interesting to know how well Oklahoma performed nationally there.
Really, if you look at these scores throughout last season in the Big 12, and I watched just about all these games. I didn't see him play Kansas. Pardon me for missing that one. But other than that, I watched, a good portion of all these games. Really, Texas was the only team that was successful offensively against them. And that was a game in which Oklahoma, by any measurement, was the better team, but made mistakes and kept Texas in the game. And it was an entertaining game. But Oklahoma was clearly the better team, but Texas had a shot, of course, of winning and went to overtime, and put up 45 points. But other than that, TCU scored 14, Texas Tech scored 28. And when it's a 62-28 game, you can even throw out the 28 because a couple of those touchdowns were meaningless. Kansas will forget, but 9 points there. Oklahoma State, not a great offense, but a guy at quarterback that's dynamic at times, one of the best running backs in the nation, one of the best wide receivers in the nation, really good offense, not a great offense, but a really good offense that's going to score 35 points against most teams, scored 13.
Yeah.
Baylor scored 14. Iowa State only scored the 21 in the championship game.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up a good point, Mark. 2 games from my perspective where they performed, not up to, I think, what they would expect, from a standard perspective. The Kansas State game and the Texas game, I think, are the 2 games, specifically the Kansas.
Oh yeah, I missed that one. That one right out of the gate. Yeah, the first Big 12 game. Yeah.
So, and I think, I mean, not from an excuse perspective, but I think there's a lot of things that you can take away from that game. It was their first Big 12 game, the second game of the year, and such a crazy year last year where it just completely fell apart like that. Like no other game that I've seen over the last few. When you have a team down 35-14 in the late part of the third quarter, it's something that you got to win that game every single time. But the wheels fell off defensively. They gave up a ton of big plays, and to your point, they were really good for 3 quarters against Texas. It kind of very much the same way. It kind of fell apart a little bit towards the end, and a little bit from the Iowa State game as well. They played good enough to win, but they gave up some plays towards the end of the game. So I think where Oklahoma was able to do a little bit of a better job is to compete for 4 quarters. Specifically in those games, like they did well throughout the season, even early on. In the first 3 quarters to be, really, and sometimes even 3.5 quarters, but, they weren't in a position that they were able to finish those games. And maybe part of it was, the lack of practice, the lack of spring, some of the experience that they didn't have, coming into the season early on, and some of those kids kind of matured and, really understood, what it needed to be. Kind of what the level of play needed to be at Oklahoma. But yeah, no, I think 2 games, and I think the challenge is for Oklahoma to be consistent through 12 games, through 13 games, through 15 games if they make it that far, is to be consistent. And if you have a bad quarter against Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, I mean, you're going to be done. So that consistency has to be there for all 4 quarters. And I think that's the maturation that hopefully you'll see out of this Oklahoma team this year.
The exciting games in college football are typically when the lesser team comes out hot and grabs the 35-14 lead. Those are the games I want to see in the fourth quarter, is when the better team is down by 21 and watching them come back, because that's usually we know they're really good and they're better, but they've had an off 3 quarters. Can they come back? When the better team's up 35-14, you just figure the game's over. Yep. So yeah, that was astonishing that Kansas State came all the way back for a second consecutive year and beat Oklahoma.